This week in the enterprise security news, acquisitions, potential IPOs, Terminator salvation in real life, the first $1 billion one employee business, Miko puts in his notice, pitch black in real life, then Tina Srivastava from Badge is with us to discuss identity without secrets, and then finally we've got two more interviews from RSA Conference 2025 to share. Amit Saha, the Chief Growth Officer of Savient, talks about the shortcomings of legacy IAM. Then Marty Momjian, General Manager of ReadyOne and EVP of Services, discusses the launch of ReadyOne out of Sempris. All that and more in this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. Then we put some ads here. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy National Catch-Up Day. That is a thing that is today. This is episode 410, recorded on Thursday, June 5th, 2025. Obviously not the way that we normally record these things. We are at Identiverse recording this live. And I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is the Dean of Data Science, the Knight of Neurodiversity, the Watcher of Data Center Waste, Jackie McGuire. How you doing,
Hello,
Jackie?
I'm fantastic. This is the first time we've recorded in person, so this is really exciting.
It is.
I'm caffeinated after a couple days of conference, so I'm hoping we can go the full 30 minutes.
And it's we're not really set up for doing it live, so it's going to be a little janky. We're going to be sharing my laptop as we go through the news here.
You guys are going to see what this actually looks like behind the scenes, but it makes us relatable, right?
Yeah, right. So we can, I keep saying every time I record something and somebody's like, no, like this morning I did a podcast and Alexandre was like, I had cat hair on my clothes. I was like, yeah, Notebook LM isn't going to do that though.
Yeah. Well, and that's I feel like the younger generation of viewers, like they're so used to the YouTube and podcasts that like they want to see you be in person.
It's just a one-person production, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they don't value slick productions, right? You know, they're pulling out the VHS camcorders. So you can check out securityweekly.com/ESW410 if you want to follow along as we go through the news. If you're watching live and you do that, that might not be updated because I haven't pushed the update yet. So you might have to wait a little bit for that to show up. Certainly if you're watching the recorded version of this, it will be up and ready to go. All right.
Just like when I lose at Fortnite, blame the lag.
Yeah, blame the lag. This is some serious lag though.
Yeah.
This might be a couple hours.
Yeah.
All
I
right,
was saying it, for some reason it took me like 6 hours to upload 2 files yesterday, no matter what Wi-Fi network I was on, 2 different devices, I don't know. So I'm going to say it's not my problem, it's technology in general.
It usually is. Yeah. All right, so the news we've got for today, usually we start with the financial stuff. So we've got an IPO in here. Forescout is talking to returning to public markets, which is, they were public and then they were taken private by private equity. We've seen this kind of boomerang effect happen a few times. I think it happened with a few identity companies, actually.
Yeah.
Usually somebody like Vista Equity or what's the other big one?
It's not AXA. What is so lots of private equity. And actually, I think the last security IPO we had was also another company that was taken private, kind of sold for parts and then put back on the public market.
In this case, Advent International and Crosspoint Capital Partners took Forescout private for $1.4 billion in 2020. And talking about launching it again, I'm not a huge fan of cybersecurity companies going public. I feel like, the shareholder expectations and the quarterly focused, being focused on quarterly earnings. In cybersecurity, you have to reinvent yourself.
Yeah.
It moves too quick. There's too much risk for public shareholders to be comfortable with it. Yeah. In some cases, it works. If you're Okta, I think it works fine. But if you're focused on any kind of prevention or detection and response, that kind of stuff, I still feel like there's a lot of areas in cybersecurity where we're guessing.
Yeah.
And those guesses might not work out, and the company might have to pivot. And the shareholders aren't going to like that.
Well, and I feel the same way about financial companies. Like, I don't understand how it's legal for banks to be publicly traded, because when you are publicly traded, legally, your obligation is to do what is in the best interest of your shareholders. And that is not usually your customers. It's not, and so same thing in security is if you are legally
Oftentimes
obligated.
it screws the customer.
Yes, exactly. And going through the financial crisis, I worked at Fidelity, and they're a privately held company, and watching the just clear cutting that other companies did with workforce and things because they had investors to appease. We were a privately held $3 trillion asset manager, and we did very, very conservative layoffs. We got to make some of the decisions that when you're publicly traded legally, your shareholders can sue you if you make those decisions. And I agree. I think the whole model of public markets needs to be rethought. I think there's Moody's kind of fired some shots across the bow of private capital in the last week. Yeah. And I think in general, there's probably a reckoning coming with how publicly traded companies are set up. PBCs, public benefit corporations, are kind of a new thing. That's what Signal's organized as.
Yeah.
And I would much rather see healthcare companies, finance companies.
And they don't have to care as much about what the shareholders do.
Yeah, they can make the choice that's in the public's best interest. And so I think a lot of where life and safety is dependent, those companies should likely be organized as PBCs instead of schedule, like C Corps or whatever they are.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if we see some cybersecurity companies go after that.
Yeah.
There's a few I have in mind that I could think going that route, but at the same time, it's just not as attractive to raise money.
Yeah.
Going public, if you're doing it for the money, look at Wiz. Look at some of these companies, they didn't need it. They grew past a point, far past the point of where you would have everything you need to go public, and they just didn't need to.
Yeah.
And I've heard that repeatedly from cybersecurity companies that said they were going to IPO. They're like, Netscope was going to IPO 5-8 years ago. I don't know how many years ago now. And they're like, we just don't need to.
Yeah, well, and private equity and investors don't have a lot of options to put their money because we haven't had robust IPO market. And so I think the pool of investors to choose from, you don't need to go public to be able to continue to raise cash. And it's just become such the norm that no company ever becomes cash flow positive ever, that when you're after you IPO, that's kind of an expectation that at some point you're going to become cash flow positive. And if you keep with venture capital and private equity, you don't have to do that, right? You can stay pre-revenue forever.
Yeah. Maybe not forever, but for a long time for sure. So also in financial news, Zscaler announced they're going to acquire Red Canary. And this caused quite a bit of kerfuffle. I still have not figured out where the rumor came from, but the rumor was that they were acquired for $4 billion. And then the actual number came out because Zscaler's public and they have to publish the deal details, and it was $675 million, which is not $4 billion.
Yeah.
So people were kind of freaking out. They're like, $4 billion, that doesn't make any sense. That's way too much. That's, especially for an MDR firm. We are seeing higher multiples for MDR firms for these kind of hybrid software services plays out there. Traditionally a services company would be 1 to 2x. Yep. And so we've been seeing 5 to 7x. And I think the exception. There have been a few exceptions out there, that have broken 10x. But Red Canary looks like they've had some layoffs, looks like they've had some trouble. So it looks like growth was slowing down for them. They crossed 100 million ARR in 2022, 2023. But then they've only added 40 million to that in the last 24 months. So maybe not the growth numbers they were hoping for. So
I actually
maybe that's part of the reason for the exit.
I sat down with Jay Chowdhury, the CEO of Zscaler, yesterday to do an interview, which will be published in a couple days, talking to him about this. And so I've been very, very bullish on services for a couple years for a number of reasons. The primary being cyber risk insurance. So I used to work in finance. I was 50 state insurance licensed, did some studying on underwriting. And I think all insurance in the world rolls up to 6 or 7 companies. It's like Chubb, AXA, Travelers. And so there's all of these reinsurance markets where insurance gets turned into basically like a security and resold. But at the end of the day, those losses all go up to this top of the pyramid. So what's going to happen is any type of financial crisis, any type of real estate crisis, it could even be things like crop insurance, retail insurance. if we have a significant setback in the economy, those underwriting standards will get even more stringent. And after malware and all of the losses associated with ransomware, we already saw cyber risk insurers kind of pull back. So my thought on services is like within 5 years, you won't be able to cover all of the check boxes that you need to get cyber risk insurance, or even if you can, it would be significantly more expensive without managed services. And so this is kind of, I think that's what's pushing this. One of the things I found really interesting that Jay was pointing to, one of the reasons they wanted to pick up Red Canary, is actually their effective deployment of AI and agentic AI. And so if you think about an MDR company, because they're managing detection and response, they can kind of, no two security stacks are the same, but they can create more consistency within their customers, which really allows them to train security agents in a much more consistent way, right? Because the thing that makes it hard to automate security is that no two incidents are the same. So what Jay was saying is that they've gotten to a point with their agentic AI where they've actually been able to automate a number of low risk, high volume, low value things in their managed detection and response that Zscaler feels like all of their customers could really benefit from. So I think that was one of the bigger parts. Jay shared my kind of inclination that services is going to be table stakes for most vendors going forward. But it was really the AI seemed like a big focal point for Zscaler.
Yeah, and I'm a little skeptical. I've seen a lot of these, 6 months before an acquisition, all of a sudden AI is plastered all over everything. So I'm wondering if there's some AI washing going on there, because I worked a lot with Red Canary in the earlier days when I was an industry analyst, and they were pretty efficient, pretty effective. I'm pretty proud of what they built without AI. And we're seeing that AI is actually really slow for security operations. Especially generative AI, the more traditional techniques seem to be quite a bit faster.
Yeah, so when we say agentic AI, I think we're talking about more of like the data parsing, the less subjective and probabilistic stuff, and the more deterministic stuff that we were talking about on day one at Identiverse is because they have so many customers doing like VPC logs is a great example, right? VPC logs are one of the most high volume, low value things until somebody gets in and starts moving laterally, or one of your cloud services goes haywire and just starts sending millions of logs. And so I do think, yes, I think there's tons of AI washing going on, but I had not really seen Red Canary out there talking about AI. So I think that look, Jay is a brilliant dude. He's a very, very smart person. And as a CEO, multiple people who know him well have told me like he's very detail oriented and he's really in there. So I would find it hard to believe that he would do this without really digging into it, but we'll see. I think the biggest thing is that there are very fundamental differences between running a services business and between running a SaaS business. And we were just talking about sales goals and things like that. You can't have a services business on a 3-month sales treadmill. It does not work like that. That's not how things work. And so it'll be, what always is the failure here is the merging of the managed services, and and quite frankly, it's usually the services customers who get screwed. Still healthy skepticism because we're in security, but I think it's a good pickup on Zscaler's part.
Yeah, I think if there is a good use case in these, for agentic AI and handling alert fatigue, that kind of stuff, I think the MDRs, the MSSPs are where we're going to see it first, because their margins are so important to them, and it's just not cheap to do it though. So I think by the end of this year, my prediction, we'll have a much better idea if there is a role for this technology in those companies, if it does alleviate some of those challenges, or not. Yeah,
it does speed up. Like, a lot of companies are like, all right, we're either going to ingest the log raw and put it into Splunk or some other expensive platform, or we're not going to ingest it at all. And I do think there's some amount of intelligent automation that can help alleviate the all or nothing problem, which I find in a lot of earlier security operations.
So being at Identiverse, I wanted to touch on a few new features here. I want to do that real quick because I want to get to the stuff we mentioned in the intro. And there's a couple things that We're going to have to abbreviate this segment so we can get Tina on here.
Yeah.
But Dashlane just announced you can do everything with their password managers with just security keys, no passwords. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Like it's not a huge announcement, but it's one of those steps that we need to see before we can really kind of take passwordless serious. Is the thing that manages all my passwords. Can I go passwordless with that?
Yeah.
So, now we can do that. And then the other one, Google Chrome appears to be reworking how credentials are managed in Google Chrome and adding a lot more functionality to the secrets manager that's built in, the password manager built into Google Chrome. So that's cool to see because most people don't have Dashlane or 1Password or something like that. Most people are just going to use whatever's built into the browser.
I hope so Google, if you're listening, please unify payment, wallet, password manager on Chrome, and password manager on Pixel devices, because depending on what browser I'm in and what device, it's still the same Google account. Sometimes I can autofill payment information and passwords, sometimes I can't. And I hope that they're making it better because it's been incredibly frustrating for the last year.
Yeah, and do you want to touch on Operation Spider's Web, and then we'll jump to the squirrel story and wrap up after that?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things I really wanted to talk about Operation Spider's Web was this really interesting military attack that happened in Russia. So essentially, Ukraine drove, Mack trucks with these Connex as shipping containers on them deep into Russia. So the question was missiles are really expensive, bombs are really expensive. You're literally blowing up millions of dollars at a time, and Russia has this massive bomber fleet, right? And so the question was how do you, and sorry, if you guys can hear the road construction that just started behind us, I'm not sure. Apparently they're dismantling Identiverse. So what happened essentially is Russia uses lots of bombers, and they're older, right? Russia's fleet's older. Yeah. So Ukraine happened to have these 2 Russian bombers in one of their air museums. They took them out. They took all these little drones that cost about $700 a piece.
Oh my God, cheap.
Yeah, and they used AI to train these drones on where the most explosive and vulnerable parts of these bombers were.
Yeah.
And then, so they drive these trucks. There's a remote control that opens.
They're going to use the fuel that's already in them, right?
Yes, and that's the big thing, is you don't need as much of a payload if you can use the fuel that's in the planes to blow them up.
Yeah.
And this is where that funny meme came from with all the tires on the Russian bomber. They were actually doing that. They were putting tires on the wings so that if the bombers were blown up, the shrapnel wouldn't affect the planes next to them, because that's what was happening.
Oh, wow.
So they drive these Connexes in. There's a remote control that opens the doors on the top of the Connex. In that Connex is another box that's got a couple hundred drones and their chargers all fully charged.
What
that
a
box
sight
opens,
that must have
and there are videos. You need to go watch these. We'll make sure one of the videos is linked in this.
Can you imagine the sound of a bunch of angry?
Yeah, and it literally
That's why
sounds
I said Terminator
like a swarm
Salvation,
of bees,
right? Yeah.
And they lift up and they target with insane specificity the fuel tanks, the propellers, all of the things that will do the absolute most damage. And they used AI to train these drones with just these 2 old basically what do you say, museum planes that they had.
Yeah.
And I think the statistic I saw, and somebody I'm sure will pop into the comments and correct me, was they did almost $7 billion worth of damage and took out almost a third of Russia's bombers with this operation. I think the real funny notable here is that Zelensky met with Trump 2 weeks ago, and he didn't say anything. And I don't think that was a mistake, and I don't think it was unintentional. I think they absolutely knew that this was the thing that it probably wasn't safe channels of communication to share with us, because we're not necessarily an ally.
We don't know what safe channels are.
Yeah. And so, it was just the efficiency
knockoff signal variants.
Yeah, because, if you think Patriot missiles cost something insane, it's like $3-4 million a piece. And you're literally just lighting them on fire. And so to be able to accomplish this with drones.
True kind of hacker ethic in this, And
I think that's what people loved about it, is it's just so scrappy.
And that's why we're talking about it here, not because we're going to become we're not going to start reporting on Ukraine, but yeah, this use of AI and tech and drones, like this combination.
It's a whole new front of battle, right? Like we've already said, cybersecurity is the fifth front of war now, and this is the kind of hacker mentality you need when you're facing a force that's 10x the size of yours, and you're like, we don't have $10 million.
I'm not sure it's still 10x anymore.
Yeah, but they're like, we don't have, the millions of dollars to blow up. We're not getting the weapons we were before, so I don't know. I love it. I don't love it because it's destruction and warfare, but I love it more than blowing up millions of dollars at a time.
So one thing I mentioned in the intro, I think it was Anthropic. The CEO predicted the first $1 billion business with one human employee will happen in 2026. I think that's bullshit unless it's a crypto scam.
Yeah.
And if it's a crypto scam, we've already seen that happen, right?
Yeah. So. I can't help but want to be like, well, what about Builder.ai? It turned out to be 600 engineers in India, not the AI company that we thought it was. Does that count if there's only like one actual real employee that's not a contracted engineer?
Right. Yeah. I don't think it's going to happen.
No.
And the other thing I was going to mention here, Mikko Hyppönen put in his notice. He's been at the company most of us know as F-Secure since 1991. After his career has been the entire history of cybersecurity.
Yeah.
So we don't normally talk about when executives move from one business to another, but he is going to, wait for it, anti-drone company.
Yeah, I saw that post.
Anti-drone tech.
Yep. Well, and again,
complete coincidence that we happen to have both those stories in here.
Yeah. I mean, the only way to counter AI-powered drones is going to be with AI-powered defense, and so I think this is something we're going to continue to see. Becoming this kind of cat and mouse game of, and if you've seen Dan Magee, I follow on LinkedIn, posts all of these kind of like defense tech videos of like the cages people wear to avoid detection by drones. Have you seen these? The like box suits that they have soldiers. They're like kind of made out of PVC, and it's like a cube you run in because the drone can't tell you're a human if you're a square.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I've seen people put on cardboard boxes. I have no idea why this story is coming up in Italian.
You can translate it.
Right, so weird. I didn't even know Wired had an Italian edition.
Interesting.
But this is our squirrel story. Infrared contact lenses are coming that let us see in the dark even with our eyes closed.
That's gross.
Gross? That's amazing. What are you talking about, gross?
Oh,
you don't think that's cool?
Because they're going to be out for approximately 30 minutes before some gross bro in a basement figures out a way to use them to invade my privacy. That's why.
Yeah, I mean that's something we have to do on this case. Anytime or on this show, anytime new technology comes out, our minds tend to go to what's the abuse.
Well, yeah.
What are the abuse cases here?
Yeah, I mean it's always, and I hate to be a fatalist or negative about it, but with great power becomes great opportunity for exploitation. So
for creepers.
Yeah, I actually saw that Zenni Eyewear, which is a huge online eyewear company, is actually starting to sell anti-face tracking, anti-infrared glasses. So you can buy these lenses that have a reflective coating, so that it's harder to do facial recognition.
It's interesting because everybody we're talking to here is like face authentication is the way everything's going. That's how you're going to move through TSA. That's how you're going to move through the airport.
Yeah.
So, fine if you want everything to take extra time. You want to do the freedom frisk and all that. I'm sure there will be a process for people who opt out, but I think convenience is going to win out there.
Yeah, I think this is more for passive tracking, so that when you're just walking around in a
city,
Walmart, or even in a Walmart,
you should have the choice, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You can't opt out when you walk into Walmart. They track everything you do. They track your Bluetooth. They know how many shelves you stand at, how long. Yeah. It's insane.
Yeah, unless you turn off your phone. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't even have to join the Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a pretty interesting squirrel story. Technology is based on nanoparticles capable of absorbing infrared light and converting it into light visible to our eyes. So that's a spectrum we can't see, right?
Yeah.
Like we can see it with a phone, with a camera on a phone, but not with our eyes. So I think that's pretty cool, converting light that's not visible to us into visible light with something that's passive.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's no electronics involved here. So super cool.
Yeah.
And that was the pitch black reference. I think they call it a shine job in the movie that allows him to see in the dark.
Yeah.
Modify his eyeballs so he can see in pitch dark, hence the name pitch black.
I can probably count on one thumb how many Vin Diesel movies I've intentionally watched. So
Yeah.
it's just not up my alley.
All right, that's all we've got for the news today. Stick around. Next up, we've got Tina Srivastava.
Srivastava? We're
Srivastava.
going to have to clear it up with her.
We're going to check on that. The co-founder of Badge. She'll be joining us in just a few minutes. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Today's topic is identity without secrets, and we're excited to have Dr. Tina Srivastav with us today, co-founder of Badge, and we're going to jump into what identity without secrets means. But first, I don't know how embarrassed you get about bios, but you have a very cool bio, and we have to mention at least some of this stuff that you've done. So MIT-trained rocket scientist, entrepreneur, author, books, patents, FAA certified pilot. You've got a YouTube video with like 3 million views of you just explaining how planes stay in the air, right? So that's pretty cool.
Amateur rapper.
Yeah.
I heard
you
on the list. Threw down some bars at the competition the first day of Identiverse.
Yes, well, it's all about getting your MFA rollout. So,
Yeah.
So, do you have ADHD? Do you just is it like you want to do everything? You just say yes to everything? Like what led you down so many different paths?
yeah, so it's weirdly tied together, Adrian. So coming from that aerospace national security background meant that I had a security clearance. So my fingerprints were stored in the Office of Personnel Management, the OPM database.
Yeah.
And when that database got breached, it was this eye-opening moment that how do I prove that I'm Tina without giving up all my private data, my biometrics?
You can't get new fingerprints.
I can't get new fingerprints, exactly. And so, in fact, that national security thread and that breach is why we founded Badge, to make sure that doesn't happen to anyone else.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I wanted to have you on, how often do people say, is there anything you haven't done? Do people say that to you a lot? So people say that to me all the time. And we actually, Tina and I met at a Sober and Cyber event at RSA. So I sponsored, I personally don't drink, and I always feel better in spaces that other people are drinking. And so we met, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's somebody like me. Because I'm the same way, right? I've done all these different things because I'm always looking for a new challenge. And people are always like, is there anything you haven't done? So when we were talking, it was like when I would tell you, oh yeah, I've done this, you weren't like, wow. You were like, oh yeah, I also did this weird thing. So it was I was like, this is my kind of person. Like, not only are you brilliant, but yeah.
It was such a great event, and even just like the reminiscing about Lisa Frank and Punky Brewster, it was a fantastic, well-run event.
I brought all of these Lisa Frank like sticker and coloring books with me to this event and like put them on all the tables so people could like nerd out with, because of course I'm a product of Lisa Frank culture. Yeah. Proudly. Of course.
Yeah, so let's jump into it. So the title that we teased here, let's get into fuzzy cryptography, how you discovered that, and how that leads to better biometrics.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we found that our biometric data had been breached, and we were really questioning, why is this data stored? Because if private data, biometric data is stored, it's really only a matter of time until it's breached. And so we started looking into the math, I would say, being nerds, we started looking into the cryptography, and we found this 20-year open problem in that field, in fuzzy extraction. And so fuzzy extraction is, how do you extract a stable key, or the same key every time, from a fuzzy source, like a biometric, authentication data, things that might be different every time. So dirt, lighting conditions, body temperature, these are things that make it such that you
French
can't
fry
just...
fingers.
Yeah, I break my nose a lot.
There you go. And it means you can't just hash the biometric, because if you have two hashes, they'll only match if they're both exactly the same. And so since they're fuzzy, since they're different, you can't hash it. And so that was really the problem that we tackled, that if you can reliably extract the same key from fuzzy data, then you don't have to store that underlying biometric data, and you can eliminate the risk of stored credentials.
So there's something I want to clarify there, and I'm tempted to say I want to double click on this.
I'll punch your laptop instead of my own, because I don't have one.
What is biometric data today? Like traditionally, how is it stored? Because I know a lot of places say we don't actually store like the image of your face or the image of your fingerprint. It's some kind of algorithm that derives some data weights or
like
something like that, you know,
yeah.
from the positioning of the, you know, whatever it's looking at in your fingerprint. And that's why you have to enroll it from different directions and roll your finger to the side when you enroll and do all that stuff so it's a clear image of it. But I think there's kind of a misconception there of, you know, companies saying that's not your biometric data, but is it?
Yeah, that's really focusing on the right point there, because what it is really all of the secret information about your biometrics. Some people call it the feature vectors, the minutia. What are the unique parts that allow you to identify that, you know, this is Adrian? And you know that it's secret because there's so much effort put around protecting it. So even if they don't call it the raw biometric, maybe they call it a template, it's still something that has to be protected, and something that if it were compromised would compromise your biometric data, you know, that private information.
It's essentially a set of measurements, right? So if you see, like I was walking through and there's the kind of geometric shape around somebody's face, or you see the dots, and it's essentially all of those measurements, right?
Yeah.
So while it's not the actual picture of your fingerprint, there's only so many fingerprints that would have all of those same
They talk about it as if it's like a one-way hash, but I don't think it works like that, right?
Exactly, and the reason it can't be a one-way hash is because from the time you enroll to the time that you authenticate, some things change, right? That's that fuzziness. So the lighting conditions, the dirt, your nose, right? It means that it's a little different. So if it were a hash, the hashes wouldn't match. And so that's why you have to traditionally store that biometric data at the time of enrollment to compare at the time of authentication.
So there's something probabilistic there saying, yeah, that's 80%, and you know the threshold is like 72, like, or you know,
it's like an error tolerance.
Yes, exactly.
Percent likeness to it.
Right, and that has been this unsolved cryptographic problem of how do you go from something probabilistic and determine, you know, to something that's actually a cryptographic key. That's a very, you know, binary specific thing. And that's what we've been able to do by solving this fuzzy extraction problem, now have a repeatable, reliable cryptographic key even for people that are fuzzy.
Right, so you've kind of bypassed the need to store a secret, right? You know, where you're generating you've managed to find a way to generate the same key, even if the input is not the same every time. Yeah,
Exactly.
I'm trying to say it in my own words to make sure I understand it.
That's exactly right. It's exactly right, because traditionally you have to store that biometric data, and it's really stored in one of two models. One is a central database, which is what we were just talking about with the OPM breach. You see this going through airports, grocery stores. There's a lot of, you know, central database of biometrics, which has all kinds of privacy and regulatory issues. Or you store it on the device. So that's like, for example, if it's stored on your phone or on your computer, you know, something like a Face ID or a Touch ID. And in those situations, yes, you can definitely re-authenticate back to that device using your biometric and comparing against the stored biometric. But if you lose or break that device, or you're on a new device, you can't use your biometric to prove it's Adrian. You now have to fall back to password or those security questions, your third grade teacher, your favorite ice cream flavor, and we're finding that attackers are better at knowing that information than we are.
Yeah, I can't remember that stuff, but attackers can find it. Like, yeah, I don't remember the name of my fourth grade teacher today. Apparently I did 2 weeks ago, but.
Right.
Mine is just full of ridiculous stuff, like it'll be Hulk Hogan or something like that.
Yeah.
Like I just make up stuff and I put that in my password database, right? Like none of it's true. None of my answers to any of my secret questions are true.
Right, and then you have to remember what you made up.
Exactly. Hence the password database, which I am heavily dependent on.
Right, and you know, I would be remiss, we're here in Las Vegas, you know, that MGM casino hack was really from that exploit, right? That you can, as long as there's something to lose or something to forget, you can call into a help desk and say, okay, you know, I don't have my phone, I don't have my two-factor.
Opportunity.
It creates opportunity for an attacker to say, I'm that person, steal the credentials, and launch an attack.
So zooming out a bit before we talk about the specific implementation that you guys have built, this approach, I imagine like it not going to just work for faces. Like you could apply it to different things. Like could it work for fingerprints? Could it work for pets? Could it work for like how far can you take this to uniquely identify a thing?
Yeah, exactly, and great point, Adrian. So we solved this cryptographic problem generally, and so our customers in healthcare, finance services today use any combination of face, fingerprint, voice, device characteristics, PIN code, whatever factors you want, and it can be in combination. So, face to access your bank balance, add voice or PIN to authorize a high-risk transaction. It could really be any factors. I would say the most difficult factors are those fuzzy factors.
Yeah, okay. And then specifically what you're building here, is it focused on one specific biometric? Like what you're actually, and I guess I just don't understand much about badge yet. Is this technology you're licensing, or are you building a product? How does badge work as well?
Yeah, so our product is live in production today with customers in healthcare, finance, services, and users use badge every day to log into their most sensitive applications. I would say that face and fingerprint, PIN code, device characteristics are some of the most popular. We even combine folks that have like a physical prox card for building access, tap. The flexibility of badge to use any factors really makes it viable for any use case. And one of our biggest use cases is one around shared devices. So in the healthcare setting, doctors, nurses, clinicians, they have to authenticate to any device in the clinic or across clinics. Bank tellers have to authenticate to different devices in a bank and across bank branches. And so the ability to authenticate to any device and not have that one-to-one binding to a device really unlocks a lot of use cases and secures many users that have traditionally been vulnerable.
Yeah, it was one of the conversations, one of the interviews I did was a company that focuses heavily on healthcare. And that's one of those places where they have like banks of tablets, and you just grab a tablet, the idea is you just grab one and go. You don't have one that's permanently assigned to you. And, nursing stations, you got to walk up to something, you got to log something, you got to check out pharmaceuticals, whatever you're doing. Just creates a lot of friction if you need to log in every time.
We did a story last week about CEO, I think it's actually airing in a couple weeks, but a CEO who walked up to a kiosk that was not secured because, again, this is a huge issue. And I've seen the ones where they just scan like a barcode to log in that's on their badge, and that doesn't seem very secure, but yeah. So I think the alternative to this problem is the smaller hospitals that can't implement a solution like badge or just leaving them unlocked, right? So
yeah, long story short, he was having a bit of an episode and thought he was doing a pen test at a hospital, but he was just a patient.
He wrote a PowerShell script that took like a screenshot every so often and uploaded it to, because he was paranoid that because that hospital network had a previous data breach, his data was going to be, he says, because he thought his data would be breached, and he realized, oh no, I'm in here for mental health treatment. What if somebody finds out? But yeah, so. No,
it can be scary. I mean, I know that we talked even at RSA, and you had a great piece afterwards talking about privacy, the concerns that people have, how this is an evolving concept, and I can certainly understand people being concerned about their medical data, keeping that secure. And again, it's this question of if you have stored credentials that can get compromised, what private data could get exposed.
Yeah, and it's funny, so I was actually reading a story a couple weeks, or last week, about, this is totally tangential, but like a CIA operative, and I was thinking about this with like, if you have to store the biometric measurements, he was talking about actually wearing one of those crazy like rubber masks from a spy movie, and I was like, how much easier would it be able to be to build one of those masks if you had, just thinking about the crazy stuff that, yes, that's spy movie stuff, but if we're talking about the OPM, how far-fetched is that really, right? And that like now I can build one of those crazy masks that has the right biometric measurements because I know what they are because I hacked it off a device. Like that's, yeah, I think we're getting to a world, and I think the other thing is like, what you recognize with badge is that we're never going to be able to fix legacy stuff, and I think that's where some vendors get bogged down, is like, let's fix what's already happened, and with badge, it's like, let's just go forward in a better way. So let's let's stop storing biometrics. It's like, it's not going to do anything for your biometrics that are already out there in the ether, but at least it disconnects everything going forward from that information, so that those biometrics now are useless, right? They don't mean anything because Badge has created this personal key to take the place.
I think you mentioned you can migrate from some of those older systems, right?
That's right, exactly. So, in the banking context, if there's a central database of fingerprint biometrics, which is the case with one of our customers, and now realizing, okay, the privacy, security, regulatory issues of that, Badge can convert an existing database into public keys. And in fact, if you wanted to show it, we've done where kind of keep both alive for a short period of time, show that you never need to use stored biometric data, and then you can fully destroy
just for
and
people's
decommission.
comfort,
Yeah, exactly. And then and then show that it's never needed. So you don't need to store that. And I think that's really an important message to get across, that a lot of people aren't aware that this breakthrough has happened. And so it's really important to know, hey, it is now possible to authenticate your users, even in these difficult scenarios, like you described, Adrian, with a bunch of tablets in a pool that someone has to pick out. It's actually possible to securely authenticate those users. You don't have to have a central database of biometrics. You can do so in a privacy-preserving way.
And I think the story I wrote that you were talking about is, I was like, we basically, at Zero Trust, we're at an identity conference, we have to live in post-privacy security, and that we have to assume that every single piece of data about us is out there now. And I was saying, I get alerts all the time that the mental health care provider from a company I worked for 10 years ago was compromised. And I'm like, I just assume that all of my medical information's out there now, all of my personal information, and so this is almost an imperative, because we have to move past those specific individual measurements, because it's all out there, right? So Adrian, to your point, you can convert to these things, which is a really good idea, because if we're in a zero trust world where we assume everything's compromised and nothing's safe, we shouldn't be using static measurements like that.
Well, and so let's talk about that a bit, like potential attacks against this approach, liveness checks, all that. Are there hardware requirements? Do you need a certain quality of image? Do you need some kind of depth information about the face, to distinguish between a photo or a live face?
Yeah, this is great, and I know we were chatting about this before. So, couple different pieces. So one is third-party testing. So Badge has gone through extensive third-party testing. They have something called PI, which stands for pose, illumination, and expression. So varying the lighting, varying all these conditions, making sure you can authenticate in all those scenarios, checking things like masks, photos, screens, making sure none of those types of attacks can succeed, making sure that you can't do any sort of injection attack, making the computer think that something came from the camera, but actually it was an AI injected stream. All of that is built into the system to ensure that only you can authenticate as you. And we've been able to do so in a way that doesn't require custom hardware.
Oh, okay.
That it's possible to just use any 720p camera, which is, you'd be hard pressed to find one that isn't better than that today. And that really is a big difference, that you don't need, custom computer, you don't need, like for example, Windows Hello requires special hardware.
Yeah.
We can leverage any of that, as I mentioned, the flexibility
None of my hardware
of
works
Badge.
with Windows Hello.
Yeah.
Right, so you can be up and running today and make sure that that's secure, those environments work, and those processes are secured.
Great.
Is there I guess for example, to Adrian's question, if someone, for example, is trying to use a picture of somebody's face and things like that, do you have a secondary layer of verification built in where it's this may be, but is it possible for a customer to set up the kind of wave your hand in front of your face, or at that point do you go to a secondary biometric or secondary key that's stored?
Yeah, so it depends on the organization how they choose to do it. So we have been able to demonstrate, and through third-party testing, that no, photo or screen, even a live moving screen, would be effective. It's stopped and not able to authenticate. But yes, we certainly advocate for multiple factors. There are many scenarios in which you can use that. You can have, again, the flexibility of badge means that you can meet the customer where they are and use what they want to use, what flexibility they have, and you can use a combination of signals that weren't possible to use before. So one of our CISOs was explaining that there were 90 different attributes that they wanted to use to authenticate a person, and if they had access to these, they could make it very frictionless and seamless. But the problem is that storing all that data, some of it being like GPS location, browsing history, it gets very creepy and it becomes a privacy nightmare to store all that data. Well, what if you could now, in a privacy preserving way, authenticate with that data without ever storing it, without ever having a risk that data's in some database that could be compromised or breached? Well, now you can provide seamless authentication using a lot of these passive factors without incurring a privacy issue.
Awesome.
Yeah, so you mentioned before there's a number of different factors that I think can be combined with it. So the way you're deriving that key, is it using those multiple factors each time? Is it the face data or the face plus the PIN, and then you derive the key from it? Or I don't know if that's getting too deep into anything that might be proprietary or.
No, happy to explain. So basically, the system can work in like an N out of M scenario. So you can define, any 2 of 3 factors can derive the key, and there's some Shamir sharding and some more cryptography I could dive into, but basically that's how it is. So like a common use case for us are workers on a factory floor. When they're on the factory floor, there are sometimes shared devices, and they might want to use one of those devices to, log in to check their corporate email. So one factor can be that it's one of those approved devices on the factory floor, so kind of a device characteristic, and face. So bam, bam, they're in. Now they go home and they want to check their payroll, so they can use face plus PIN. They're not on any sort of corporate device, they're on whatever device they want, face plus PIN, there you go. Then if, let's say, they forget their PIN, well, when they're at work and they're on the approved device with face, now they can reset their PIN. And so it's a nice, controlled environment where they don't fall out of, account recovery. They can use, 2 out of 3 factors.
And is it compliance that's forcing that face plus something? Is like face alone good enough, but you have to do more because compliance says, there has to be multiple factors?
Yeah, so it depends. We do have, obviously some use cases where face is sufficient. Many use cases, for example, the HR app Workday sometimes requires 2-factor. We have customers that use badge to comply with that Workday 2FA mandate.
Gotcha. Okay. And right now this is enterprise, right? Badge, everything is enterprise, but this technology, do you see like a consumer play here? Like, is there an opportunity for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this means that you are your token, right? You are your key, and you can seamlessly authenticate across any device anywhere. As consumers, we lose our phone, our laptop. People that have come to this conference today, left their device in an Uber. It's like a constant thing for consumers. And we know that it's such a headache when we have to upgrade to a new system, transfer all of our stuff, remember all of our logins. What if you could just buy a brand new device, open it up, look at it, rederive your key, access your data? I mean, what if you could get out of a swimming pool, walk up to a system, derive your key, access your data, and the moment you walk away, there's nothing left behind. There's no secrets, no trail behind you. I mean, that's really the vision that we have for Badge, that you are your token, you can prove who you are anywhere, and that's for all people on the planet.
And I think it's a great time too, because I've noticed increasingly over the last probably 6-12 months, people are really starting to buy into passkeys. So I had not seen, I've noticed a noticeable, both vendors are starting to incorporate passkeys, retailers, all of those things. And so we are now authenticating with our biometrics on our devices most of the time. So I think it's just a matter of converting it from that stored actual information to badges information, right? So
that's exactly right. And badge, our customers have implemented badge as a passkey. We're FIDO compliant. The other advantage is, one of the challenges with passkey is when you get into provenance attestation, right? If I just airdropped my passkey to Adrian, then he could log in as me. If I have multiple passkeys on a device, it's really hard to tell, if my family member's logging in or am I logging in. And
I feel that I've had that problem.
Yeah.
There's a usability issue with, so I mean, talking about passkeys, that's kind of where I was going to go with this. If you walk around this expo floor, you've got people saying, security keys are the future. We just talked about Dashlane now allows you to use security keys to log into your password manager, so you can do passwordless with your password manager. I've always been kind of anti-security key because I'm old enough that I had to use RSA tokens.
You had a keychain.
Hardware tokens that always had to be resynced, and you'd have to call the help desk and have it resynced. And I was so happy when we got smartphones and apps for that. I was like, no more stuff on a keychain.
Yeah.
And then security keys come out, and I'm like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
Come on, guys.
I agree with you. It feels a little bit like going backwards, and whatever that thing is on the keychain, it's just a proxy for you. And what if you could be you? What if you don't need that proxy, something that you could lose or someone else could steal?
I've had one break off in a USB port once.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's I'm kind of getting a little authentication whiplash with the passkeys are the future, security keys are best. Face is the future. There's so many different options. I've got backup codes stored in my password database for so many different accounts. Every time I log in, I have to use a backup code because the passkey never works right.
Yeah.
I mean, I like that there's options, but I would kind of like the industry to just settle on a workflow, because every different system I log into, there's a different workflow. There's another, CRA stuff, I have to use my Okta app.
Yeah.
Just for CRA stuff.
Well,
right?
and I think we also need to be realistic about the fact that people are going to share accounts. My husband and I have a shared email account because it makes it so much easier to do everything. And so if we
marketing
could
teams have to share social media accounts, and that was a mess for a long time.
Yeah, so if we could just get to a place where it's like we have two different personal keys for this account, and whichever,
split keys.
Yeah, split keys, and then there's trackability, because I know who actually logged into this account, whether it was myself or my spouse, and just a more realistic approach to security than don't share your password. It's like, that's not, we have to have shared accounts. Like, there are some accounts that we both need access to, but it just doesn't work to set him up as an administrator on my email. Like, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, right, I imagine you spent a lot of time on user experience, right, on that workflow.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of the magic of this concept that you are your own key. With cryptographic keys, shared accounts, non-repudiation, all of this is trivial, right? And, you don't have to have backup codes and recovery codes. Some people call them an emergency kit. Well, it frankly shouldn't be an emergency that I lost my phone, right? And yet it is for so many of us. We're so reliant on all the data we stored in there and everything in there. I mean, how freeing and how liberating could it be if you could just go up to any device, prove it's you, access your data, and not have an emergency recovery access code that you needed?
Yeah.
And it also solves the Shaggy problem where nobody can say it wasn't me, right?
Yeah. Well, Tina, thank you so much for joining us today. Learned a lot about that, and I would love to have a version of badge that I can use one day.
Yeah, if you decide to go
as an independent contractor.
If you decide to go the personal route, we'll try it out for you. Yeah.
Awesome. I'm glad I have more badge users with me today, and we're just at the beginning here. We've just came out of stealth mode last year, and we've, looking around the expo hall, all of our partners are here showcasing badge. We're integrated with Ping, Okta, Talus, Cisco, CyberArk, Radiant Logic. I mean, it's just been so wonderful to see that pull, see that recognition of the unique differentiator. We're excited to be here.
Great. Yeah, thank you again. And thanks, Jackie, for joining me today for our first in-person Enterprise Security Weekly. This is a lot of fun.
I feel like we need to do this more.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a different feel for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't have to do these long pauses, and like you don't talk over each other as much. Like you can interject things. Like latency is a big deal.
Yeah, you feel the energy.
You can threaten to ruin other people's laptops when they try to double click on something.
Yeah. Big thanks to everyone watching or listening to this week's episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. And though this is live, there will be something after this in the package version of this that we send out to YouTube and all the podcast players and stuff like that, that will have those interviews from RSA with Ready One and Savient that I mentioned earlier. And next week, we've got a pre-recorded interview with Rob Allen from ThreatLocker, which Jackie also joined me for.
It's a
very,
good one.
very interesting story that we discussed in that one. Should be a good watch, so keep an eye out for that next week.
Yeah.
Welcome back to Identiverse 2025, reporting here for CyberTV from the expo floor in the Mandalay Bay Conference Center. And Jackie, once again with me to wrap up the show.
Yes.
How was the show for you?
It was great. You know, I was excited to come to Identiverse because I think identity is kind of one of the pressing topics right now, and that we were just, talking to Tina from Badge, and we live in kind of this weird post-privacy world where all of our data is out there. So seeing how different vendors are trying to tackle that problem of like, how do you figure out who's using their own data, who's using stolen data, it's just really interesting to see all of the different approaches to it, and what. And also how people are choosing to talk about it. You know, there's always like are you the
language, the
buzzwords?
buzzwords.
Are you fear mongering? Are you like trying to convince people they're living on the cutting edge? Or there's always different ways to market. So that's always one of the things I like.
Comic books. I've noticed there's some comic book marketing is a thing now.
Yeah.
It used to be like the dummies books.
Yeah.
Remember that went on for a while.
Yeah, we got some really cute comic books from ThreatLocker when we did Zero Trust World as well. I brought those home for my kids and they were super excited.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and it's it really is, wrapping up that conversation with Tina, I do feel a little bit of whiplash of things. Like, without my password manager, I would be completely lost. Like, that is the center of all my stuff, because I'm constantly testing things out. I probably add at least 5 to 10 new accounts every week to my password manager, constantly trying out new stuff. People are giving me access to alpha and beta products of security products, and then just new consumer stuff coming out, like when ChatGPT came out, and all of a sudden there were thousands of derivative products built on top of it.
Yeah.
I was testing out a bunch of that stuff. So
I assume you use the suggested strong keys when you
I don't know any of my passwords.
Okay, and so I've started doing the same thing, but I think we were talking about earlier in the news about Google changing up the way that they're handling it. One of the issues I have is that I do that now. I use the strong passwords, and it is not reliably syncing across my Chrome browsers, and so. Same, like
you're using the built-in Chrome?
Yeah, so I'm using the Google Password Manager, and perhaps that is where I'm going wrong, and that I should be using a third-party password manager, because it's on my phone, it's a little bit more reliable, but there will be several times that I have to open something on my phone because that password manager is actually different than the one in Chrome, and I don't know, it's just, I feel like as far as we've come, and as much technology as we have, this is a problem that should not be a problem anymore.
So full disclosure, 1Password is a sponsor of the show. They do some stuff with CRA, but I've been a customer for over a decade, and I've used a lot of different, I think I've used all the major password managers at this point, and there are a lot of other ones that are lovely as well. But that's the one I've kind of locked into, and it's actually pretty easy to switch password managers. Like, all of them have done a really good job of, you have to be very careful because you're exporting all your passwords in plain text. You want to make sure you scrub that file real good once you get it imported into the other one. But it's, for me, it's absolutely essential. And it's interesting as we're adding passkeys to the mix, and it's no longer just storing the passwords, but also some of these, like I use it for TOTP, for generating those 6-digit codes, automatically enters those for me. I know some people intentionally keep those separate, but with as much as I'm logging into stuff every day, I'm going the convenience route. And hoping for the best.
We're making the same mistake that we absolutely grill companies for making, right? Is that, like, we would have had better security, but it was hard.
It's hard. It is hard.
No, and we were just talking about this a couple days ago here, is the other thing that I hate is that endpoint detection for mobile devices, is almost non-existent, right? And so thinking about, all right, at some point, maybe my phone's going to get compromised and my password manager is going to get popped, and how annoying it is that there's so few ways to really adequately monitor your mobile devices for compromise if you're not using an enterprise device. With an enterprise device, it's great. There's plenty of mobile EDR platforms, but for my personal, I would love, if anybody wants to sponsor the podcast who has a really, really effective EDR for personal mobile devices.
There are, so Fleet DM, you should be able to use Fleet DM for free. And that might give you, I'm not sure exactly what you're looking for from like an EDR perspective, but most mobile MDM have some good monitoring capabilities. For a long time, I used Cisco Meraki with all the home stuff because they had a free option. But it hasn't been updated in forever. It's the UX is ancient. It's missing a bunch of features now.
Well, now I'm going to have tool sprawl because I've got Sophos on my MacBook, right? So then I'm going to have something else. I don't know.
There is some stuff out there though. if I didn't mention before, I try everything out. So
Yeah.
I know some of that stuff. Also, a good friend of mine, and sometimes co-host on the show, Guillaume Ross, used to work at Fleet.
Oh, okay.
Fleet DM. So that's one of the reasons I'm aware of their solution.
Well, now everybody's going to know what my EDR is.
But I think, one of the lovely things that happen on mobile devices is they don't really need additional security that much. I mean, social engineering still works.
Yeah.
That's how we're seeing info stealers get on Macs. It's not because Macs don't have good enough anti-malware features, but the person can always override.
Yeah, it's always like
always an option.
smishing or some type of,
Yeah, there's well, in some cases on like iOS, there is no override for some stuff.
Yeah.
One app cannot touch another app stuff. Things are very well sandboxed there, which is the reason some people prefer Androids, because that level of security does make certain applications, certain features not possible on iOS.
Yeah, it does. And I've had Android devices since it was Motorola Droid, so before Google bought them, and I've just been in that ecosystem for so long that when I tried to use an iPhone, and the fact that it was not customizable to even like a tenth of the extent that you get so used to Androids, you're like, I can put widgets wherever I want. I can have as many screens as like it, and then you get on an iPhone and they're like, no, we're going to tell you how things are set up, how they work, and everything is safer that way. And I'm like, yeah, I know it's safer, but it's just not as fun.
It kind of rubs me the wrong way too. Yeah. But that's where iMessage and FaceTime are, so that's the platform I'm stuck on. And yeah, that's another thing we're getting into here is, we're finally seeing at the enterprise level, coming to terms with the fact that, the personal smartphone in your product is part of your work identity, and companies depend on you having that. There's still, I know some people who carry a device for work and a device for personal, but for most of us, that's, it's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot to deal with, and most people just use one. I can't really do that with my physical devices. Like I mentioned, Guillaume, he's really good about keeping work and personal separate, but I find it's just too much for me.
It's hard.
I do split up like within the browser different profiles, but I don't use separate devices for both.
Yeah, and the different profiles is not always easy to do. So like I have an iPad Pro, and the iPad version of Chrome, trying to use multiple device profiles there, like it won't open different instances of Chrome, so you're always having to do the like top right-hand corner account switching for Google, and yeah, it's difficult.
Arc makes it really easy and visible. You can see all your profiles all the time, and there's keyboard shortcuts to switch between those profiles. But the mobile version of it, I don't think it's as easy. So you still wouldn't be able to on your iPad. But yeah, user experience for that, and we talked about this somewhat. User experience for these different use cases, using an iPad, an iPhone, multiple people using the same thing, like there's no one person that uses a streaming service within a family.
Yeah.
Like that's, there somebody has to end up being the admin, and like, could you remove this device? We're at the limit, the number of devices that can be on the account and streaming.
Yeah.
Such a pain in the butt.
Yeah, we're currently in my house, so I have 3 kids and my husband, and we use voice recognition on all of our speakers, but we have like 8 different accounts. And so every now and then it'll start playing censored rap music, and I'm like, what the hell? And it's because somebody misrecognized their voice and loaded the kids' account on the speaker and started playing music, and theirs is locked down to only non-explicit music. But yeah, we still have not really figured out this whole like being realistic about identity, about shared accounts, about shared devices. So that was one of the things that excited me about what Badge was doing, is like, could it just be me and I can just prove it's me, and then I don't need passwords?
I think you're at that point where I started removing some of that content filtering for my kids.
Yeah.
It's like, it's nothing worse than what they hear me say. So.
Yeah, with the 13-year-old, Google actually does it for you when they turn 13.
Yeah.
There's like different restrictions that you don't have on their accounts anymore.
Right.
But yeah, I just let my kids watch their first episode of Trailer Park Boys, so we're there.
Nice.
That was such an amazing experience.
Yeah.
I like just like getting, because we actually, my youngest daughter, we call her J-Rock. And so to get to show her the J-Rock from Trailer Park Boys that we actually nicknamed her after was amazing. So yes, we are past content filtering now, I think.
Apparently a train is leaving, so if you have a train to catch, it sounds like we're in a train station, making some announcements there.
Yeah.
The loudspeakers.
This is the full in-person conference experience that you are paying for this live stream for.
Yeah. So on the Trailer Park Boys note, I think it's a good point to wrap on.
Yeah, need a drinky poo?
Yeah, if you haven't checked that out, check that out for sure. Canadian humor, right?
Yeah, I love me some good Canadian humor, yes. Yeah.
All right, that's it for us for CyberRiskTV at Identiverse 2025. We do already have the dates up for Identiverse 2026. No, I do not have them right in front of me, so I can't tell you what those are. But if you're here at the event, it's plastered around in a few different places, and I'm sure if it's here at the event, it's probably in the website also. You can go to the Identiverse website and check that out, and go ahead and schedule it. If you're a vendor, I believe they are signing up people right now. You can pick your spots on the expo floor. So very much like RSA and all that. If you want the best spot or specific spot you want, this year's event is the time to sign up for next year's.
Yep.
For attendees, I don't know how much of this we live streamed online. I'm sure they recorded some of the talks. I didn't get to check out any of the keynotes, so I'm kind of interested. I interviewed some folks that gave keynotes, and I was here doing interviews, so I didn't get to see them. So I'm hoping I get to see some of those after the event. So keep an eye out for any content that we upload to our different YouTube channels for Identiverse content. And yeah. Any thoughts as we wrap up?
Yeah, I think the one thing I would say is that, to your point, don't be the vendor that gets caught like 6 months before the conference wondering why. So when we say that right now is a time to act for next year, being on the other side and having to plan that stuff, we really mean that. And it will make your life much easier. So I just want to double down on you really do have to start planning a year ahead for most security events.
Yep. All right, thanks for watching and listening. I think maybe the next event we're going to be doing this kind of stuff at might be Black Hat. Yeah, so we'll see you then. Yeah. Thanks for watching.